So Oregon and Washington finally made the move. They moved to the Big Ten after a lot of speculation, even supposedly having a Pac-12 meeting last Friday where they were going to agree to a new media rights deal to Apple. That did not happen. In Oregon and Washington moved to the Big Ten. Well, Utah, Arizona, and Arizona State later that night announced that they were moving to the Big 12, essentially just destroying the Pac-12 because now they're down to 4 teams, which we'll get to in a little bit. But in the NCAA, you need at least 8 teams to be FBS and 6 teams to have a conference altogether. So they can't even have a conference in Division One right now. Obviously, they'll probably have no problem getting 2 more teams, especially from the Mountain West potentially, or they might just dissolve completely. A lot to be seen before next year in July. But I think, you know, you look at this, and we'll start with Oregon and Washington specifically. We'll talk about the 5 teams leaving. I think this is the right call. I'm not jumping up and down for this or anything. I'm not super, enthusiastic about this move. But, you look at it. You got the Big Ten, which is a very prestigious conference. Academically on the football field, they're a defensive powerhouse. You got Ohio State and Michigan who will put up points like crazy too. You got to keep that in mind. You got still some storied franchises, Penn State, Wisconsin. It's a great conference. It's number 2 behind the SEC. There's no dispute about that, right? So in terms of football, that's fine. Where I'm a little hesitant is, again, USC and UCLA already made the move, so it's not Washington, Oregon's fault. But there's really no place. I mean, it's a Midwest conference, and now there's 4 teams, not just Western teams, coastal teams. They're all on the coast of the Pacific Coast. That's like 2,000 miles to a conference game, 3,000 miles if you're talking about Rutgers. And, you may be saying, well, Evan, the football teams have $1 million budgets. They can just get on a private jet and go there. True, but what about the women's soccer team or volleyball team or swim and dive team, right? Or the men's, same, right? Like, what are they going to do? What are they going to do with these weird conferences stuff? I read this one tweet. I think it was from an Oregon softball player. I could be wrong. She was talking about how, she wanted to stay close to home so she can play like Washington, Oregon schools and have her family watch the games. They're probably not going to be going to Rutgers. So it's a little disappointing on that end, but in the end, it was the right call for Oregon and Washington to go there. Now, the rest of the 3, before I get everyone else here involved, I think, it's they kind of had no decision because what were you going to do? Just wait for the Pac-12 to die? I mean, so they kind of had no decision. They were smart to leave and they were smart to go to the Big 12. That's, of course, Arizona, Arizona State, and Utah. But again, it's not very enthusiastic. I think Utah fits in nice with the Big 12. I think their style of play is very good with them. But I think Arizona, you look at Arizona State and Arizona, they're not really good football programs right now. Especially Edwards in Arizona State, he did not turn it around. So those aren't really strong teams. Big 12 is usually pretty strong. I'm surprised, I'm actually kind of surprised they took them in over Oregon State and Washington State. But anyways, so Jordan, what are your thoughts on the 5 leaving?
So the 5 teams leaving the Pac-12, I first off think it's mainly because of the TV deal, right? The Pac-12 does not have a TV deal in place for 2024. So that's what led Oregon, Washington, Utah, Arizona, and Arizona State to leave the conference, in my opinion. Um, and as for Oregon and Washington leaving for the Big Ten, it's kind of confused. It's kind of confusing to me because of the regionality. Um, I know Evan mentioned the Oregon softball player talking about how she wants to have her family watch the games. And when Oregon plays Rutgers in a conference game starting in 2024, that's going to be kind of hard for them to do. So yeah. And then as for Arizona, Arizona State, and Utah, it makes a little more sense for them to go to the Big 12 geographically, because you think of the Big 12 as a Midwest conference, and and they're not exactly Midwest, but it's close enough, right? Where Oregon and Washington are literally Pacific Coast teams. They are literally on the coast. Um, so I agree with Evan in that sense. Jake, what do you think about this realignment and who's leaving the Pac-12?
Yeah, it doesn't make sense for Oregon or Washington to be in that conference at all. Do I think it's the right move? Yes, I do think it's the right move. Oh, because of what Jordan mentioned with the TV deal that the Pac-12 doesn't have in place, or I guess the Pac-4 right now that they don't have in place. So they have it in place moving to the new conference, and think, you know, I just think it's the right move. Evan, go back over to you.
So I just want to touch on the media deal thing really quick that Jordan brought up too. Apple TV, I really want to put this in perspective, right? Apple TV does baseball. They do Friday night baseball games for the MLB. We all know this. I'm sure our teams have gone on this, and you have to pay. You have to pay to watch Apple baseball. You can't just watch it. So essentially what Apple TV, so you think, oh, you have to pay. That must be a high demand, great quality thing. No, the announcers, all due respect, I'm not saying they're bad announcers, but the way they run, they clearly don't talk to the players. Of course, all announcers talk to the players beforehand. They get a feeling about how the game's going to go. They clearly don't do that. They don't do interviews. They do these weird mid-game interviews that just feel awkward all around. And, it feels like a podcast. Again, no harm to them. They're just not doing the real job of an announcer. That'd be like if all of us just, were called to announce the Marlins and Reds tonight. Like it's not going to happen, and we're not going to have that background knowledge. So that's kind of what Apple is. So no, that's a smart reason for these big, especially these Pac-12 teams to get out of that when, the ACC, SEC, Big Ten, they got these mega deals with Fox and ESPN. You don't want to be stuck with Apple TV. I will say that. But anyways, I'll throw this back over to Jordan first. What's the future for the Pac-4 team? So we like to say Pac-4 is a joke, but it's really what's happening. You got Stanford, Cal, Oregon State, and Washington State. What do you think is the future outlook for them, Jordan?
First off, let me just say it's sad to see what the former Pac-12 at least has become. As a college football fan, you never want to see a conference go away, but I feel like we might be in for that in the future. It's either that or the Pac-12 maybe merges with the Mountain West, and they create some form of quote unquote super conference, right? And that would be 16 teams. Jade, what do you think about the future of the Pac-12? What's going to happen in your opinion?
Yeah, we were hyping up the Pac-12 last week, and now they might be disappearing. Um, I've heard rumors of more Pac-4 teams leaving. I've heard rumors of Stanford going to the ACC. I've heard rumors of California going to the ACC. But I've also heard rumors of, Clemson wanting out of the ACC, FSU wanting out of the ACC, all those teams. So it'll be interesting to see what's going on with these next couple years.
So realignment is far from done.
Yeah, it's far from done.
Well, there's going to be another realignment. That's the thing, because there was
Yeah.
the realignment of the 2010s. Now we got one of the 2020s. There's going to be a 2031s. And let me tell you exactly what that's going to be. It's going to be the Big Ten and the SEC absorbing whoever they want, including the ACC, and everyone else is going to be scrambling around. So when Jake brings up that Cal and potentially Stanford, like he said, could go to the ACC, I say that sounds crazy, right? You think of the Atlantic coastal teams of California, like that makes they're right on the Pacific.
That's really funny to think about.
Yeah, the Atlantic coastal. That's the exact opposite. But I'm gonna say this: that's not a dumb move at this point. Then the geography means nothing at this point. USC and UCLA already showed that. So you want to get with a strong conference. I think right now Stanford and Cal will probably go independent. They're not going to want to go to the Mountain West. They're for sure not going to want to go to the Big 12 because of academic reasons, by the way, if you didn't know. Like, you may be thinking, well, the Big 12 probably has better teams than Stanford and Cal right now. That's true, but Stanford and Cal think of it from an academic perspective. So unless they're going to the Big 10, they're not going anywhere else. They're going to hang around. And the ACC, you got Duke, you got North Carolina. There's some prestigious schools in there. They might be interested in that. So that's not far-fetched. But the other two is what I really want to talk about with Washington and Oregon State, because they got screwed out of all of this. And it looks like they have nowhere to go but the Mountain West. They can't go independent. They're not strong enough for that. The Pac-12 looks like it's not going to be in existence unless if it merges with the Mountain West. So unless if they get an outside deal, like maybe the AA, American Athletic Conference, because they got poached, maybe they want them. Because again, remember, geography means nothing now. So you can just go wherever you want at this point. So maybe the AAC tries to poach them. Otherwise, they kind of have no option outside the Mountain West. They got screwed. They did get screwed. And that's a lot. But you think of that, a lot more teams are going to get screwed in the 2030s, especially in the ACC.
Hmm.
So we'll have to look for it. But overall, yeah, they did get screwed. So just to wrap this one up, I'll go to Jake first on this one. What do you think about the way college football is trending?
I mean, I think that, teams are joining other conferences to build these kind of, what Jordan brought up earlier, these kind of super conferences. And I think that's not good for the game. I think that you have all these teams that are gonna kind of, I guess, rule college football, and you want college football to stay competitive.
Yeah, Jordan.
First off, let me just bring up what makes me upset about this conference realignment stuff. You're losing what makes college football great, and it's the rivalry games. With Washington and Oregon going to the Big Ten, you're no longer going to see, unless they get this figured out in a non-conference deal, Washington State, or Oregon State, right? And while we're talking about realignment, UCF went to the Big 12 this year. You're no longer going to see UCF and USF, the famous war on I-4, right? So
Yeah.
that is what we're losing with this realignment stuff. What makes college football great and why we love watching this game.
Okay. So just to wrap this up, I'm torn on this. I think it's too early to tell. And here's why. Because the rivalries do suck. Like all the in-state rivalries we're losing is terrible. Me mentioned that. You got the Washington, the Oregon ones too that had just got dissolved too. It does suck to see this over the dollar, but I think it's still too early to tell because one reason I think in a good direction, in a positive direction, could be the playoff. The playoff could be very successful when they start that with 12 teams. That could give a lot of other teams chances that they didn't have. I hate the playoff that it's standard right now. It's got 4 teams. 2 of them never even have a shot. Usually it's really just 2 teams. So honestly, the 14 playoff never really made sense to me. Either just do the BCS national championship game or do an expanded playoff, which they're deciding to do. So that's good. But the other thing that worries me and what worried these guys is the super conference. We don't want another NFL. We already have an NFL. College sports has to be college sports. If it's a semi-pro league where everyone in the Big Ten and the SEC just poaches all the smaller school teams, the Group of 5, or even the ACC or anyone, they just poach all their talent. That's not fun. That's not college. Not only is it not fun, that's not college sports. That's not what it's about. You're supposed to be dominant in your respective fields, not shielded by 2 conferences. So I still think it's too early, but there's reasons for optimism and despair.